We have a session on Sri Aurobindo and his philosophy in contemporary times. It's a panel discussion. As you all are aware, we are celebrating 150th birth anniversary of Sri Aurobindo. So in that context, this panel discussion is happening. I would request our esteemed panelists to kindly come on the stage and be seated. Shri Chamu Krishna Shastri ji, Shri Anand Neelkantan, Mr. Olivier Pironio, Mr. Vikram Sampath, who is moderating, Shri Kiran Vyas ji. We are very thankful to him for joining us at such a short notice. Thank you. So as per the traditions of National Book Trust, I would request our director, Shri Yuvraj Malik, to kindly welcome Mr. Oliver Pironio.
Would like to honor him. System पे हूँ. Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Welcome, ji.
And Shri Kiran Vyas.
Very good morning. Namaste, bonjour to all of you. On the last day of the book fair, we start this morning about someone about whom Rabindranath Tagore called him the very voice incarnate of India's soul. In a poem that he wrote called Namaskar, in a Bengali poem in 1907, Tagore had called Sri Aurobindo as that voice which symbolizes the Atma, the soul of India. And I think the description could not have been more apt. Someone who started his life as a revolutionary leader, a firebrand revolutionary who was also involved in a bombing case, and from there he becomes a spiritual Maharshi, and a series of contributions to the spiritual life of India with books like The Life Divine, Savitri, several others which have become milestones in the history of Indian philosophy. Sri Aurobindo was born in 1872, and quite coincidentally on 15th of August, the same date that India was to get her independence several decades later. He was born in Calcutta, and at the age of 7, he went away to England to study, and that's where he did his schooling, and he also did his college there at the King's College. He returned from there, and from there he got into the service of the Maharaja of Baroda, Sayaji Rao Gaikwad. Most of these Maharajas were also secretly patrons of the revolutionary movement in India, which was gaining ground in the early 20th century to seek complete liberation for the country. And the Baroda Maharaja was also someone who financed Sri Aurobindo, and he was working ostensibly as a professor in the English college there, but simultaneously he was also working for the radical movement, the revolutionary movement in the country. So my first question would be to Sri Anand Neelakantanji about, could you tell us a little more about this early and very interesting phase in the life of a philosopher who also threw a bomb, who was a radical revolutionary? A little about the early life of Sri Aurobindo as a revolutionary leader.
Good morning. Sri Aurobindo's life, as a storyteller, I find it so fascinating. As a spiritual seeker also, I find it so fascinating. Stories and spiritualities and any art forms keep merging. Yesterday when we were talking about Chandranagar, I briefly mentioned that after he had gone into hiding in Chandranagar, when Motilal Roy had given him asylum, so he had stayed in a very small attic and in shops. It was when he was staying there, he started getting the divine revelations. When he was inside, staying alone in these kind of hiding places, they used to change the hiding places in most of the nights. Even though it was in the French territory, the British spies were after him because he was a wanted man at that time. When he was staying there, he used to hear these voices, he used to get the vision of Krishna or the universal spirit, which incidentally, mother living at that time in France, she talks about, you also used to get the same kind of visions. A voice used to tell him when to leave, before the police could come, before the spies could come. In the night, he got the vision that they are coming, and he woke up Motilal Roy as per the legends, and they went to the Ghat in the night. No boats were available, but miraculously a boat appeared. I'm telling from the story perspective. Historically, I'm talking about the legends and the lores which you hear from him. In India, most of the things from Shankaracharya to Buddha, more than history, we learn through them through the stories. So that's why as a storyteller, I'm narrating it. He was taken across the river, and again from there, he was supposed to reach at Pondicherry. He reached Pondicherry, and mother's path coincided with that. Even though it took some years, the same voice took her to Japan. Her husband happened to come here during the First World War time, and he talked about Aurobindo to her, and she recognized him as the man who was sometimes coming in her dreams. Before she had reached Aurobindo itself, the mother talks about a great spiritual experience which she had undergone while living in Japan. In her 5-6 years in Japan, she talks about a day when she was looking at a cherry tree and felt that, she was moved so much that she felt that there is no difference between her and the cherry tree. She talks about being one with that. That is a kind of the transcendental feeling which many of the yogis say. She was born naturally with that. You feel the breeze which the tree is facing. When a butterfly sits on the flower, you feel that it is sitting on you. There is no difference between you and the entire universe. You are vibrating in the same, you are synchronized to the tones of it, the tune, the music of it, the universal music of it. In India, Aurobindo, perhaps, she says that he was guiding her through the process. Later when they met, and later with the 24, if I'm right, the 24 disciples, when they started the Aurobindo ashram, this vision kept coming on to her. And she decided it as a life function to take this integral yoga to the world. It is, Aurobindo broke from the conventional definition of the spirituality and brought forth a path with which we can speed up the process of involution. So Aurobindo's legacy continues even now from a freedom fighter to somebody who, freedom fighter for a country, to someone who liberates the entire humanity. It is a big journey. When we talk about spirituality, the spirituality is not confined to any religion. Spirituality is not confined to any group of people, a race or a gender or the borders of any nation. It is not even concerned about living inanimate or animate things. It's all seeing one, seeing the Brahman, seeing the everything as one on, and understanding that oneself, there is no difference between the entire universe. So his message transcended the nationality, even the national spirit, even though he remained a patriot. Patriot, when we look at from the heights of his, is a very smaller term. Even nationality, even nation is a small term. Even the world or any philosophy itself is a small term. So he had gone beyond that, and his aim was to bring the entire humanity to those level of consciousness. I leave it to, as a storyteller, beyond that I don't have the knowledge to talk about him. This is from my little understanding. I leave it to the experts who have been living this through his path. My comments are like just a awed onlooker. Thank you.
Thank you, Anandji. I think what is very important is also to note, that the city of Paris and France played a very, very important role when it came to the revolutionary movement in India. Whether it was London or Paris, in the early decades of the 20th century, 1900 to 1920, during the First World War, lot of Indian freedom fighters made this part of the world their home, and Paris welcomed them with open arms. So you see a lot of photographs there of some of these people: Madam Bhikaji Kama, Shyamji Krishna Varma, Vinayak Damodar Savarkar, Virendranath Chattopadhyay. All these people lived in Paris, moved in and out between Paris and London, and collaborated with several of the freedom movements in this part of the world, where liberty, fraternity, equality was so important to the people here, and mobilized that support to garner, independence back in India and complete independence from British rule. So in that context, Sri Aurobindo's Anushilan Samiti that he established there, along with his brother Barin Ghosh and others, that became very, very important. One of the early secret societies of India that played a very important role in freedom movement. And while Barin Ghosh was sent to Kalapani in cellular jail in the Andamans, Sri Aurobindo, as Anandji mentioned, had this vision of Lord Krishna and took to spirituality. I would now request Mr. Olivier to, share his initial thoughts of this great man, and also the very important India-France connection that comes in the life of Sri Aurobindo with the Divine Mother, Mira Alfasa, as she was called, and later became the mother. What Aurobindo called was her Shakti, the main primordial force that led him to his spiritual collaboration. A little on his both of them.
Bon, alors d'abord merci pour l'invitation. Donc je suis mathématicien, donc je n'ai pas de raison d'être ici, mais je suis associé depuis 40 ans avec l'ashram de Sri Aurobindo. Nous avons un petit centre à Paris et c'est pour ça que je suis invité. Alors vous êtes ici parce que c'est le salon du livre et que Sri Aurobindo est un des très grands auteurs indiens. Il a écrit à peu près ses œuvres complètes, c'est 37 volumes. Alors, donc il faut presque une vie pour tout lire. Donc on a déjà dit qu'il écrivait en anglais, qu'il avait été un révolutionnaire, qu'il a ensuite il s'est exilé à Pondichéry pour éviter la prison. Il avait déjà fait 1 an de prison. Et ensuite, il s'est dédié au yoga. Donc, le yoga au sens indien, n'est-ce pas? C'est-à-dire, pas le hatha yoga, mais le yoga, c'est-à-dire ce qui fait que vous allez vous unir au divin. Je parle le langage de l'Inde. Et donc, Sri Aurobindo, je voudrais insister sur le fait qu'il a été vraiment très très loin dans le yoga. Il a dépassé tout ce qu'on appelle en Inde les siddhis, les pouvoirs occultes qu'on peut lire dans la littérature. Donc c'était un grand sanskritiste. Il a démarré des Védas et de la Gita, et il est allé beaucoup plus loin, à mon avis. En particulier, il a dit que l'avenir de l'humanité, c'était pas tel qu'on le connaît actuellement, mais c'était un nouvel état d'être qu'il a appelé le supramental. Et dans cet état d'être, vous trouverez la solution de tous les problèmes, c'est-à-dire que si vous voulez régler un problème sur la planète actuellement, il faut savoir que ce sera temporaire. La vraie solution, c'est de travailler sur soi et d'essayer de se rapprocher de cet état idéal qui s'appelle le supramental. Donc je vous engage à lire ces livres. Il y en a 3 qui sont très connus. C'est La synthèse des yogas, La vie divine et un grand poème épique qui s'appelle Savitri. Vous commencez par n'importe lequel. Et si vous êtes touché par cette littérature, eh bien, je crois que ça changera votre vie. Voilà.
Good morning and thank you. I'm a mathematician, so you may wonder why I'm here for the Paris Book Festival, but I've been connected to the ashram of Sri Aurobindo near Pondicherry for 40 years, so that is my connection. He's not only one of the greatest Indian writers, his complete work comprises 37 volumes, but he also is a very rich writer, and it would take you a lifelong to read all his writings. He wrote in English, this has already been said. He was a revolutionary. He went to Pondicherry to avoid jail, where he had already spent a year, and then he turned to yoga in the Indian meaning of the term, that is to say, the way to unite with the divine, which is he went very far in yoga beyond the siddhis, the powers. He was also a big Sanskrit scholar, and he started with the Deveda and the Gita, but he went further. And for him, the future of humanity was a different state of being called the supramental. And that was to be the solution to all problems. If you find a solution today to a problem, it can only be temporary. The only way ahead is to work on oneself, to approach as much as possible this supramental state. If you want to read one of his books, I would suggest you start with either The Divine Life, Savitri, which is a long poem, or The Synthesis of Yoga. And if you touched or moved by any of his writing, then it will change your life.
Thank you. The Divine Mother, as I mentioned, Mira Alfasa, who was born in Paris on 21st of February 1878. From an early age, she was spiritually awakened, very conscious. She was born to Jewish and Egyptian Turkish Jewish parents, and she had these visions, these dreams of Krishna. And it is said that in 1914 was when she first went to Pondicherry. And 3 miles away from the town, she saw a huge white light coming out of the town of Pondicherry. And that light was the spiritual energy, the spiritual light of Sri Aurobindo. And she decided that this is where she would be for the rest of her life, be his spiritual collaborator, co-founder of the ashram, which was established in 1926. And summarizing her philosophy of what spirituality meant to her, she said this, and I quote, "I belong to no nation, no civilization, no society, no race, but I belong to the divine. I obey no master, no ruler, no laws, no social conventions, but I only obey the divine. To him I have surrendered my all," unquote. Kiranji, I'd like to ask you, about this wonderful spiritual collaboration between Sri Aurobindo and the Mother, which was also in a way the coming together of 2 ancient societies, India and France, and how that spiritual collaboration blossomed, and also about Sri Aurobindo's literature, which is a corpus of Indian philosophy.
Om Namo Bhagavate Sri Aurovindaya. Om Anandamai Chaitanyamai Satyamai Parame. Om Tat Savitur Varam Rupam Jyoti Parasya Dhimahi Yanna Satyena Deepayet. Om Asatu Ma Sadgamaya Tamasu Ma Jyotirgamaya Mrityur Ma Amrutam Gamaya. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Namaskar. Should I speak in English or in French?
As you wish. If you speak French, I will translate.
Okay. As you wish. Je crois qu'une grande majorité entre vous, vous êtes plutôt francophones, and you'll excuse my Indian friends who speak more of English, but so that I can reach directly to them. Je vais parler en français parce que beaucoup d'entre vous, vous êtes francophones. Cette grande collaboration entre la mer et Aurobindo, bien sûr, notre ami vous a présenté quelques détails sur la vie de Aurobindo et la mer. Pour moi, tout est commencé avant ma naissance en 1942, quand mon père était en prison pour l'indépendance de l'Inde. Il avait commencé à lire Aurobindo, il lisait la revue Arya et il méditait dans sa cellule de prison. En sortant de la prison, Gandhi, avec qui il travaillait, lui a donné charge de Gandhi Ashram, c'est-à-dire Sabarmati Ashram, qui est connu comme le lieu de Gandhi. C'est là que j'ai eu la chance de ma naissance et notre maison se trouvait à 40 mètres de la maison de Gandhi. Mais ce n'est pas ça dont j'ai envie de vous parler. C'est la philosophie de Aurobindo qui a tellement touché mes parents qu'il a commencé à visiter, en vivant en Gandhi Ashram, l'ashram de Aurobindo. En 1948, mon père allait depuis plusieurs années. Il était allé pour le darshan de Aurobindo. Aujourd'hui, c'est un très grand jour, le 24 avril, parce que Aurobindo donnait son darshan, c'est-à-dire les gens venaient le voir seulement, au départ seulement 3 fois par année, le 15 août, le jour de son anniversaire, le 24 novembre, le Siddhi Day, ou le jour de réalisation, 24 novembre, et puis le 21 février, qui était le jour de naissance de la mère, sa collaboratrice, sa Shakti, sa créatrice, qui a créé l'ashram de Aurobindo.
As the majority of you here speak French, I will speak French so as to reach you directly. I want to talk about the big collaboration between the mother and Frau Aurobindo. Our friend has already given details about their lives, but for me, it all started before I was born, in 1942, when my father was in prison for the independence of India. In prison, he read Frau Aurobindo and the Arya Review, and he spent time meditating in his jail cell. When he came out of prison, Gandhi gave him the charge of the Sabarmati Ashram, Gandhi Ashram, and I was lucky enough to be born 40 meters away from the house of Gandhi. But I want to talk about the philosophy of Aurobindo. My parents were so impressed by it, but even though they were living in the Gandhi ashram, they started to visit the Frau Aurobindo ashram, and my father was there when he gave his dasham in 1948. And today is a very important date. At the beginning, Frau Aurobindo only gave his dasham 3 times a year, on the 15th of August to celebrate his birthday, on the 24th of November for City Day, of the Day of Realization, and on the 21st birthday to celebrate the birthday of the mother, Mira Alfassa.
Mr. Olivia, I'll ask him and then. Mr. Olivia, any particular works of Sri Aurobindo that touch you deeply, about which you would like to share information about his writings, his philosophy?
Oui, j'ai compris. Ouais, écoutez, alors le problème pour un Français, c'est que les œuvres de Sri Aurobindo sont plutôt difficiles à lire. C'est-à-dire que, et on essaye de comprendre pourquoi, et il faut très longtemps pour voir que, en fait, les œuvres de Sri Aurobindo, c'est tout le contraire d'un roman. Dans un roman, vous vous approchez d'un film. Quand vous lisez, vous oubliez que vous lisez et vous voyez presque la scène que vous lisez. Quand vous lisez Sri Aurobindo, si vous avez la moindre pensée qui passe dans votre cerveau à propos de ce que vous allez faire plus tard, n'importe quoi, vous perdez le fil et vous ne comprenez plus ce que vous lisez. Donc, les recommandations que je vous ferai, c'est de ne pas vous, vous décourager. Et vous avez les trois que j'ai donnés. Vous pouvez les essayer. S'il y en a un, vous trouvez ça trop dur, vous prenez l'autre. La vie divine, c'est ce qu'il y a de plus dur. Essayez Savitri. Alors, Savitri, c'est en anglais. Il faut très bien parler anglais. Donc, il ne vous reste plus que la synthèse des yogas. La synthèse des yogas, il y a des parties très simples, très faciles à lire, et d'autres plus difficiles. Donc, peut-être ne pas les lire de la page 1 à la page 800, parce que c'est des gros bouquins. Il y a d'autres œuvres qui sont faciles à lire, qui contiennent aussi beaucoup de choses imprégnées du yoga de Sri Aurobindo. C'est des essais politiques sur l'idéal de l'unité humaine, par exemple. Donc vous pouvez aussi essayer ça.
The problem for French people when approaching the works of Aurobindo is that they are very difficult to read. And we ask ourselves the question, and it takes a long time to see that his writings are very different than anything from a novel. Because in a novel, it's like a film. You can think about something else and still follow the plot. If you forget what you're reading, if you think about anything else, your shopping list or whatever, while reading Aurobindo, you will lose sight of the meaning. So my advice to you is not to lose heart. It's difficult, but you must keep working on it. So I've quoted 3 books. You can read any of them. The Divine Life is the most difficult. Savitri is only in English, so it leaves the yoga book, which is in parts easy, in parts not so easy, but you may not have to read the whole work from page 1 to 800, because these books are very long. Other books which are maybe easier to read and get you closer to the philosophy and the thinking are books on the ideal of our political essays, on the ideal of human unity.
One of the fundamental aspects of Sri Aurobindo's philosophy was that he considered the human being as an intermediate creature between the animal consciousness and the divine consciousness. Unlike the traditional, Hindu belief that you would get liberation or moksha only after death, and you would then probably ascend to a higher consciousness plane, he believed strongly that in this very life, a human being can evolve to a higher consciousness state, which he called supramental consciousness, and to achieve that, to reach that intermediate stage, was his philosophy of integral yoga. Which was a combination of several ancient Hindu yogic traditions, which he amalgamated to create this new technique. So Kiranji, I would request you to share a little about integral yoga, and also maybe read some of his literature, poems, or something from the Savitri, which is an iconic book of Savitri and Satyavan, which is a allegory for actually the soul and the super soul, and a little detail about that.
Thank you. Yes, the collaboration of the mother and Sri Aurobindo sorry. La collaboration de la mère et Aurobindo, c'est une grande collaboration. Pour la première fois dans l'histoire du monde, on a deux maîtres spirituels en parallèle, la mère et Aurobindo. Deux dans le corps, mais uniques dans leur conscience. Je vous disais, en 1948, j'ai eu, à l'âge de 4 ans, le darshan de Aurobindo. Ce que je me souviens, c'est uniquement les têtes de tigre, la vision de Aurobindo, un homme, un grand sage, avec un œil qui me souriait légèrement et un autre œil qui était sérieux, qui m'a pénétré véritablement, comme si, même à l'âge de 4 ans, j'ai senti que ça pénétrait mon corps, qu'a pénétré mon cœur, et bien sûr, je n'avais aucune pensée, un silence intérieur total, une joie absolue. Son regard était presque comme un grand marteau qui m'a frappé sur la tête et qui m'a ouvert à une certaine sorte et universelle. Et d'ailleurs, c'est là que j'ai compris que moi je suis né pour être auprès de lui dans sa pensée. Voilà, Aurobindo et la mère, le premier travail que moi j'ai eu, c'est l'éducation. Le yoga intégral et l'éducation intégrale, je vais les confondre parce que c'est basé d'abord sur les 4 parties de l'être humain. L'éducation physique, l'éducation vitale, l'éducation des 5 sens, l'éducation de la créativité, l'éducation de nos émotions, l'éducation mentale de l'esprit, et puis surtout l'éducation psychique et spirituelle. L'ashram tout entier, quand j'étais là, on était à peu près 1200, 1500 personnes, et dans ce qu'on appelle l'école de l'ashram, on était environ 300 élèves de la maternelle jusqu'à les cours supérieurs, on va dire jusqu'au bac plus 5. Parmi ceux-là, on avait plus que 150, 200 enseignants. En réalité, dans une classe, 3 personnes à 5 personnes étaient considérées correctes dans cette école de l'ashram. C'était une école de libre progrès, c'est-à-dire un élève, un enfant progresse librement. Alors, ce qu'on appelle l'éducation, avec tant d'enseignants, on avait la chance d'apprendre. Bien sûr, l'éducation était pour les matières scientifiques en français, c'est-à-dire physique, mathématiques étaient en français, alors que les autres matières étaient en anglais, comme histoire, géographie, la philosophie et tout cela. Alors après, pas seulement la créativité, on avait les plus grands artistes de l'Inde qui étaient des enseignants là pour l'art. On avait aussi les plus grands poètes, écrivains de l'Inde tout entier qui étaient là comme nos enseignants de littérature. Moi, j'ai eu Sundaram, un des plus grands poètes de la langue gujarati, comme mon enseignant. Mais j'ai eu aussi, pour la langue sanscrite, un des grands experts. Mais je vais parler dans tous ces détails. Ce qui m'a vraiment frappé comme système éducatif, c'est l'éducation du vital, nos énergies subtiles, qui se font avec le yoga certainement, mais aussi il y a toutes sortes d'exercices. Après, l'éducation mentale, mais l'éducation physique, c'est-à-dire tous les jours, tout le monde, tous les élèves, tous les ashramites, les 1500 personnes étaient sur différents terrains de jeu, terrains de sport, en jouant au football, ou en faisant l'athlétisme, ou en faisant la natation, ou même les arts martiaux. Et pas seulement cela, il y avait aussi la gymnastique moderne et aussi la gymnastique indienne avec les asanas et les autres choses. après l'éducation physique, tout le monde me pose la question, quand est-ce que vous méditez? Quand est-ce que vous faites le chemin spirituel? Mais le chemin spirituel était à chaque instant. Devenir conscient de chaque pas, de chaque acte, devenir conscient de chaque mot, chaque phrase qu'on prononce, et du matin au soir, développer cette conscience. Mais pour tout cela, Aurobindo et la mère, qui était notre enseignante principale, disons, c'est sa présence, c'est ce chemin spirituel, veut dire être dans cet état de conscience, dans le calme intérieur, et être dans une autre dimension. Pour aller dans cette dimension, même il y avait toute une pratique, je dirais presque pratique d'occultisme, que nous avons appris d'une façon inconsciente, mais la mère, qui était elle-même une artiste, une musicienne, elle se levait vers 2h30, 3h du matin, et elle travaillait presque jusqu'à minuit. Elle connaissait chaque ashramite, la relation avec chaque ashramite.
As I told you, I was 4 years old in 1948 when I received the darshan from Aurobindo. And I have this vision of the wise man with one eye smiling at me and the other one looking at me with gravity, which penetrated me at the young age of 4, penetrated my body, my heart, and reached the interior silence that was inside me and filled me with joy. His look opened me to intense universal light, and I understood that my purpose in life was to be with him in his thinking. My first work was on integral yoga and integral education. By that I mean education, vital education, physical education, education of the 5 senses, creativity, education to emotions, mental education, psychic and spiritual education. We were about 1,200 to 1,500 people in the ashram, and in the school of the ashram, from kindergarten to higher education, there were about 300 pupils. And we had 150 to 200 teachers, so it was a ratio of 3 to 5 teachers per class, which was considered normal and necessary. And it was an education based on the free progress of the child. We were lucky to learn science in French, and the rest was taught in English, history, geography, philosophy. And for creativity, we were taught by the biggest artists, poets, writers in India. They were all our teachers. Sundaram, for example, one of the biggest writers in Gujarati, and we had experts in Sanskrit as well. But I was most struck by the vital education, which was an education to awake our subtle energies with exercises, mental and physical. And every day you would see the 1,500 people living in the ashram practice physical exercise, whether football, running, swimming, martial arts, gymnastic, modern gymnastic or asanas. And you may ask me, what about the spiritual education after the physical? Well, the spiritual education was present at every minute. You had to have the conscience of every step you took, of every word you said, from getting up to going to sleep. You had to live in this full conscience, and for us it was the presence of Sri Aurobindo and Mother that was the main teaching, to be in this peace and silence in another dimension. And I was taught this occult practice unconsciously, if you will, by just living with them. Mother, who was an artist, used to get up at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning and work till midnight. And she taught tirelessly, and she knew each and every student in the ashram.
Sorry, this will be easier. Je vais aller directement vers les poèmes. I'll be directly going towards poems of Aurobindo. Aurobindo is one of the greatest poets the world has ever known. In fact, for this book, Savitri, He was even proposed for the Nobel Prize. Unfortunately, that did not happen, but I still believe, because that is one of the longest poems in the English language. And not only that, it has a sound of mantras. But now I'll just read to you a poem, another one, which I like a lot, which is called Who, qui en français. Who, in the blue of the sky, in the green of the forest, whose is the hand that has painted the glow? When the winds were asleep in the womb of the ether, who was it roused them and bade them to blow? Je vais donner moi-même le français. Dans le bleu du ciel, le vert de la forêt, à qui est la main qui a peint la splendide? Quand le vent dormait au sein de l'éther, qui les a fait lever, leur a dit de souffler? And one more. Surréaliste. Une sirène, j'ai entendu, hurlant, après un mouton. Et oui, le doux son me fit rire et pleurer. Mais hélas, le mouton était sur cette rive-ci. En réalité, Aurobindo était pas seulement un poète, mais un philosophe, un surréaliste. Et pour terminer, juste une phrase de Savitri. Tout était encore obscur, redoutable, désolé. Il n'y avait aucun changement, ni aucun espoir de changement dans ce rêve noir qui était la maison du vide, une marche vers nulle part dans la terre du néant. Toujours, ils allaient à leur dérive sur objet ni but. L'affliction menait à une pire affliction, la mort à une mort plus vide encore. Oh, I should give you the English and then I'll end. All still was darkness, dread and desolate. There was no change, nor any hope of change. In this black dream, which was a house of void, a walk to nowhere in a land of naught.
Thank you, Kiranji. Before I open it up for the audience, I'd like to conclude with the 5 dreams that Sri Aurobindo had, which I think are very relevant. Here was a man who was not just talking about the political liberation of a country like India, but also a spiritual resurgence, which is very important. Political freedom may still be got, but can we get back that spiritual resurgence that the country was so famous for? These 5 dreams were, the first one, a revolutionary movement which would create a free and united India. The second was a resurgence and liberation of all the peoples of Asia. So not just India, but the whole of Asia, which he saw as one family, and her return to great role in the progress of human civilization. The third dream was also of the Indian philosophy of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, or the world being one family, where a new world union was formed, which would become the basis of a fairer, brighter, and a nobler life for all of mankind. The fourth dream was the spiritual gift of India to the world. The very unique spiritual gift that India had. How could the world actually make use of this gift? That was his dream. And the last dream was, of course, what I mentioned earlier, the intermediate step of the human being as one of an evolved consciousness. So can all human beings in this world step into that higher consciousness where we could look at individual perfection as also a perfect, peaceful, and happy society. So, Sarve Jana Sukhino Bhavantu, the old adage of India, let all human beings be happy. That seemed to be the summary of Sri Aurobindo's philosophy. So, I'd like to open it up to the audience. If there are any questions to our esteemed panelists, please do go ahead. And
It is not the question, but just one line, one point I would like to add. Sri Aurobindo was the great supporter of Sanskrit. His famous quote is, Sanskrit language should be ought to be the national language of India. Sanskrit should be ought to be the national language of India. What he meant national language of India is that it should be the link language of India. He explained it, and Mother also explained it further several times. They not only he propagated it, but he practiced it in the ashram. All ashramates were taught Sanskritam, and also from first standard. And the NEP 2020, which emphasizes on teaching Sanskrit through Sanskrit, was practiced in ashram. Aravind ashram in teaching, where Sanskrit is taught through Sanskrit and simple standard Sanskrit. This is because of Aurobindo's contribution to the world. And his all philosophy based on Vedas, of course, all of us know, and he has written commentary on Vedas.
thank you, Shastriji. Any other question? Yes.
Je vais juste ajouter une demi-phrase. Sanskrit devrait être la langue nationale de l'Inde, c'est ce que Sri Aurobindo voulait. La mère aussi a insisté, mais encore pour la France, Sri Aurobindo et la mère ont dit il y a deux langues sur la terre qui est capable de véhiculer la force et l'énergie spirituelle. La première, c'est la langue sanskrite, mais la deuxième, c'est le français. Voilà, merci.
And I will just add for the French audience, indeed, Sri Aurobindo and the mother both thought that Sanskrit should be the national language of India. But for French people especially, both of them believed that only two languages could convey the strength of spiritual energy, and they were Sanskrit and French.
Excellent. One question there, please.
Well, I'd like to just thank the guest for the wonderful session on Aurobindo. It's quite revealing. I have a general question. We have had many higher orders beings in this nation, in India. I mean, we have a being here who was, let's say, an Anglophone, then a civil servant, then a revolutionary, and then a spiritualist, an artist, a poet, a writer. Isn't it unfortunate that we have missed telling this great story during our lifetime in our history books? Because I didn't know about it till about 2 or 3 years back, what a great life this was. So what does this tell us about the way we teach history to our kids and how we teach history? And this is open question. Thank you.
India has an issue of too much history, too many heroes, too many monuments, which all could be told. We are attempting Aurobindo's story, the world needs to know. As a storyteller, it could be a great series or a film. It's such a big journey. Something which we are working on, actually what I am working on, which will soon come in Doordarshan, is about the unsung heroes, which I am scripting it now, unsung heroes of India. The project is called Swaraj. It'll come on Sunday soon. Shooting is going on. I've been scripting it. 1 or 2 episodes I acted also, and nothing to do with this thing. In that, Aurobindo story will be told along with a lot of other freedom fighters whose history has not been taught that much. Starting from 1498, when Vasco da Gama arrived in Calicut, from that day onwards, who all started fighting, to the entire Indian history, tracing through 100 episodes every Sunday. So every episode will have one hero whose story deserves to be told, and it's just a beginning. Actually, this all deserve an entire OTT series, if you ask me. All these, whether it is Patel, not only Aurobindo. If we take about Aurobindo, is a great spiritual journey from Patel to Savarkar to any side. See, I tell stories from all sides. Even the journey of, I don't know the politically incorrect or incorrect, as a storyteller, story of Jinnah, from a nationalist to somebody who divided the country. Story is interesting. Like that, through stories only, India has always conveyed ideas. Vedas, Upanishads were there, but how did it reach the common people? It went through Ramayana, it went through Mahabharata, it went through Puranas, it went through storytellers. So it is our duty rather than the spiritual seeker's duty. It's the ordinary people like us who will be bringing the story, which attempt is going on. Thank you.
The last question.
Merci. Juste pour rebondir sur ce débat trop bref pour l'importance qu'il aurait, qu'en fait les historiens ou des chercheurs se sont déjà penchés sur la vie de Aurobindo et que de manière très intéressante, son premier biographe était français. Il s'agit de Mono Hersen qui était présente à l'ashram et c'est vraiment une trace en plus de comment ces histoires se croisent et aussi ce qu'on vient de dire, comment il est délicat de redécouvrir des figures qui ont été sans doute hors la norme, mais à l'ouvrage desquels, comme on le rappelait, il est parfois difficile d'accéder. Moi, par exemple, je ne connaissais pas la citation concernant le sanskrit, ni dans mes années de fréquentation, j'étais consciente de cette pratique de l'enseignement du sanskrit à l'ashram. Donc, il est très intéressant de voir effectivement comme une personnalité si complexe a effectivement plusieurs visages qui traversent et brassent différentes cultures selon justement son inspiration et que donc il revient à nous, la postérité, ce travail si délicat de revenir à ce qu'il a écrit ou ce qu'ils ont écrit comme des traces d'une pratique vivante qui est à la fois à redécouvrir et je dirais à respecter dans sa nature révolutionnaire et parfois difficile à saisir.
This short roundtable was really too short for such a fascinating character, but I'd like to stress that his first biographer was Herzen Renaud, who was French and lived in the ashram. And it's interesting to see how histories meet and how difficult it is to rediscover someone larger than life, like Aurobindo, and sometimes difficult to access. I, for example, didn't know about Sanskrit or the teaching of the language in the ashram. So there are several aspects of such a rich, complex personalities that posterity needs us to work on to rediscover and respect the work Mother and him did in all their revolutionary aspects.
Thank you. Thank you for your comment, and thank you all for being such a patient audience, and to all my esteemed panelists, Anandji, Kiranji, Mr. Olivier, and Madam, for translating the French part so well. It is a challenge to bring into light someone as multifaceted as Sri Aurobindo in a 50-minute panel. I hope we've just skimmed the surface, top of the surface, and I hope it kindles interest in all of you to read more about this great person. Thank you. Thank you.